I'm going to spotlight this amazing person here who's been beating the trail recently of talks all over the world. So we're very, very lucky that Merve Hickok has made an appearance for us tonight. Let's find out who Merve is. I'll give you her bio now. She founded AIethicist.org. I love that all the invitations I sent out, Merve, I sent it with that in full, and they all had your picture on. They all had your link in. I thought that's brilliant. That's hundreds of people have just seen that. That's what we like. So Merve has that. She's also the CEO of Lighthouse Career Consulting. So independent consultant and trainer focusing on capacity building and ethical and responsible AI and governance in AI systems. So we're right back on track here now with AI governance and responsibility. She's senior researcher for the Center for AI and Digital Policy, founding editorial board member of Springer Nature AI and Ethics Journal. I know a few others are involved in that as well. One of the 100 Brilliant Women in AI Ethics 2021. Yes, she is. A fellow at ForHumanity Center with the very brilliant Ryan Carrier. I know VibHab's involved with them as well. A regional lead for Women in AI Ethics Collective and a member in a number of IEEE and IEC work groups that set global standards for autonomous systems. Previously, Merve has been VP of HR in a number of different roles and with the Bank of America, Merrill Lynch. Merve, what I'm going to do here, something a little different, is I'm going to ask you about this post office example in about 2 minutes from now. We saw terrible news that this software had convicted incorrectly people and put them in jail, and some of the horrific stories. So I'm going to read an excerpt from that in just a moment in what this is going to be an interactive session. But while you're just reflecting on that post office, I'm going to ask VibHab, who I just mentioned, to do a very quick community update for us, which I promised I'd come to him at this time. So we'll come back with that post office story and move on to the other parts of our conversation in about 30 seconds from now. VibHab, are you there?
Yeah. Hi. Yeah. Right. So should I just do the? I'll just do the community update right here.
Yes, please.
Right. Yeah. Hi everyone. Sorry to interject the topic. I just wanted to add that I hope you guys are enjoying the talk. If you are interested in getting involved with MKAI, we welcome all views on AI from everyone. We have a WhatsApp channel, a Telegram channel. We're going to post the links there. Join us, join in the conversation, and help us take this dialogue forward. We look forward to hearing from you. And the key point is, you don't need to be an expert. All you need to be is curious, inquisitive, and just keen to learn and discuss. Look forward to seeing you on our channels.
VibHab, thank you so much. Merve, I almost forgot VibHab, so thank you for allowing me to interject that in. I've put our links up. Right, we've taken care of business. Merve, let's spotlight you again and let's get you back on the big screen. So I know that there's this thing's been the UK press. I'll read this paragraph here, Merve, and then get you to begin the conversation today with just thinking about what goes wrong in situations like this. So this is credited to TheVerge.com. For 20 years, the UK Post Office employees have been dealing with a piece of software called Horizon, which had a fatal flaw, bugs that made it look like employees stole tens of thousands of British pounds. This led to some local postmasters being imprisoned because the Post Office insisted the software could be trusted. The decade-long fight meant 39 people now have finally had their convictions overturned. It's being called the largest miscarriage of justice that the UK has ever seen. It's not nice to read this, but let's just get all the facts out. One woman was pregnant when convicted. Several people actually remortgaged their own homes to pay the shortfall, which of course they had nothing to do with. And one man even committed suicide when it was stated that he'd stolen £100,000 from the post office, which of course he hadn't. Is it stories like this that drive your work, Merve?
It certainly is, Richard. I was taking some notes on that excerpt, but it certainly is. And some of the conversations I have, especially when we're talking about AI and prediction systems, classification systems, we need to remember that what we're embedding in the systems by way of design and choices and design choices and code choices is establishing a worth or norm for individuals. This is the normal. this is the, this is the expected value. And if you don't fit into that, you are an outlier, you are an error in the system, which means that you are either classified wrongly, or you are not, you're not reaching or accessing the resources or opportunities that you might have in life. Some of them, obviously, like this one, more important and more harmful and more burdensome than others. But AI has become so ubiquitous in our lives that it's every single day we're now reading stories like this on the harms, on how our decisions in AI and the development of AI is impacting people's lives.
Thank you so much for that. I'm going to be handing over to Odelia in just a moment to do some Q&A, because the timing is very good with you speaking for us, because on April 21st, so 8 days ago, the European Commission developed its own proposal for an AI legal framework. I know many people have heard about this, many have seen some reports on it and even read it. The framework follows a risk-based approach and differentiates the uses of AI according to whether they create an unacceptable risk, a high risk, or a low risk. And one of the key tenets of this is that the EU plans to foster excellence in AI, and I'll read this line out verbatim, by ensuring that AI works for people and is a force for good in society. Now, words are easy. When you look at that report and talk to your colleagues about this, are they walking the talk with this?
You're using my line, right? Walking the talk pace. I think it's definitely a good step in the right direction. It is moving in the right direction. But I think right now EU is trying to balance that regulation, protection of fundamental rights, human-centric AI and practices versus innovation versus competition versus harmonizing this across the member states, right? So you're not having trying to come up with that agreement or consensus on some of the issues at minimal level, so you don't have organization or companies or providers switching from one jurisdiction to another, as we currently see, either by moving servers, by applying different models in different jurisdictions. So they're trying to harmonize this across at least the EU member states, and that actually, and trying to keep it flexible as well, so it can be applied as we see new applications and new potential impact of AI. I have some heartburns with the regulation. I'm not going to lie about it, and I'll admit that I'm still going through line by line. So my printed 100 and something pages is full of post-its and highlights and exclamation marks at parts. But I think overall, it is definitely a good direction.
I'll ask Odelia to take over from me in a moment, but it was interesting just to think about the lens of bias that so often shows up in these kind of conversations. So the report highlights that if a risk is unacceptable, it means it's posed a clear threat to people's security and fundamental rights and is therefore prohibited for this reason. An example of this is that it manipulates human behavior or systems that, for example, allow social credit scoring. It says the European legal framework, therefore, would prohibit an AI system similar to China's social credit scoring. So China's social credit scoring often gets a bashing in the West as being a sort of an evil or dystopian or big brother approach to AI. Do you see it that way, or is this part of our bias about what we think AI should be used for?
In relation to Chinese social scoring system, because it is so, because it's China, and because it's so in our faces and runs so much against our morals, our expectations, that is always the one that comes up, as well as the surveillance state in China. However, we don't stop to think that, for example, London, after Beijing, is the second most surveilled city by the number of surveillance cameras and how the Met Police is using that footage as well as the data. So we have to kind of turn in, especially in our lives, in our jurisdictions, in our companies, we need to turn that mirror around and just like, oh, look at China, look what China is doing, or look what Russia is doing, or whatever. Yes, we need to tackle those issues. We need to keep them accountable, but there are also a lot of issues that needs to be tackled for the algorithms or the systems that we're already using. So we're using these systems to make predictions or like assign credit worthiness, right? In our credit systems or loan systems with the banks, we're looking at employability. Are you worthy of employment? Are you worthy of education? Are you worthy of quality education? Are you worthy of quality health benefits or benefits in general? So we're always making those assumptions and definitions of worth, which for me is also scoring. You are using the data to make inferences about people, and using that scoring that that your model came up with as a ground truth about a person's character, about a person's life and aspirations. So yes, there is that like Big Brother China example that you can, talk about and bang up on it for days ends, but what are we doing in our own cultures? How do we define worthiness of a person?
Yes, without sin casting the first stone and all that biblical stuff. Merve, last question from me, then I'll ask Odelia to carry on. And I see there's already some questions. David's posted one already. Odelia has some that have been collected by the community to discuss with you. Ton mentioned GDPR earlier on. Do you think the EU was boosted by what it considered to be a successful implementation of GDPR? Do you think they see this as a continuation of leadership in data privacy, security, and sort of personal sovereignty?
Absolutely, it's a continuation of GDPR, but GDPR itself is not without issues still. There are a lot of the obligations that comes with GDPR, but we're still not seeing like full extent of enforcement, or we're still not seeing the best practices around some of the requirements. So like GDPR gives you a right to explanation, right? We don't know what that explanation looks like in practice. We have this like websites that with their pop-ups that, or choices that you can make, etc. But at the end of the day, GDPR is still moving. One thing I would mention why GDPR is so important is as part of my work, part of my research with Center for AI and Digital Policy. Last year, we looked at 30 countries. So this was the first comparative report of its kind. And we looked at OECD AI principles versus national AI strategies of these 30 countries. And what we really cared about is what you endorsed versus what you implemented in your government agencies and public services, etc. Going back to, again, walking the talk, are you actually walking what you endorsed, what you accepted as AI principles? And one thing that we've seen was this huge discrepancy between what they say on paper, what they say on accepted as OECD AI principles, what principles they established in their national AI strategies. Then you turn around and looking at all this like fraud detection systems and welfare, predictive policing, and border and customs and border algorithms, and I can go on, etc. Right? So there was that huge discrepancy. But the other thing that we've came across was in countries that are not in EU, like who wouldn't be immediately subject to GDPR itself. Some of the countries used GDPR and its obligations, is the system, the framework that it provided as an example for their own country and national AI strategies and data protection regulation. So we have countries in Southeast Asia, in Africa, and in Latin America, who might not have that initial resources to build a data protection regulation like GDPR from scratch. But now that GDPR is there, they can actually use that as a template to kind of make it more applicable for their own countries. So in a way, I see this proposed regulation, one, to improve by the time it becomes a regulation, or the coming couple of years probably, but also giving the other countries an opportunity to use this as a template for their own regulations.
Thank you so much. Well, I've got the ball rolling, and I'm going to hand that over to Adelia now to pick up the conversation.
Thank you so much, Richard, and thank you, Merve. So I will start by reading some questions that are in the chat. So this is from David, and he asks, your website lists a large number of different sets of AI principles that different organizations have proposed. So do you have a view as to which of these sets are the best?
There are some that I use for my own consulting and training purposes. I think one of the reasons I built the website was my frustration around not seeing all these documents, whether it's principles, frameworks, toolkits, checklists, national AI strategies, etc., in a more accessible and more reachable, more condensed stuff. So I decided to create the website, the platform, as like a curated platform, repository, whatever you want to call it, for those people interested in ethical development and use of AI. There is right now, I would say, probably around within the principles page, probably around 180 or something. The ones that I use more in my work is IEEE's ethically aligned design is one. European high-level experts group, for better or worse. The trustworthy AI checklist and assessment that they created is a very good one. And the third one that I keep going back to is Singapore's model framework. So kind of using those as, even if you just like look at those three and kind of try to establish your governance and development systems, I think that's a perfect start. And like I said, over the years with either consultancy and training experiences, I developed my own framework that is not on the website, but what I use with the clients as well.
Thank you so much for your answer.
Anyway, hope you're well. Yeah,
I am well.
So there is a question from Paul. Do we need an international declaration on human rights in our relation to AI and emerging AI relation to itself and us?
Yes. I think we definitely need to build upon the already established and accepted frameworks and conventions, especially on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and apply that to AI and its impact. There are, UNESCO is doing, I don't know if any of you were involved in this week-long work of UNESCO. They had a week-long open to public consultation on the final draft of UNESCO's guidelines on ethical AI. So there's definitely going to be a good body of work and guidelines coming out of that. And the way that UNESCO explains that is it's like the second highest degree that they can do. So the first one, the highest one, is a convention. It's an international convention. The guidelines that they're working on and have been discussing throughout this week is that second level. So I'm really hopeful that a good piece of guidelines that is going to be adopted by a number of countries, more countries around the world is going to be coming out soon.
Yeah, and thank you so much for your answer. That I think it answered also to the question from Marie that was asking if other countries are going to use these European regulations. So
I definitely think so, because like I said, GDPR has been adopted by different countries for their own purposes. I definitely can see this being a like I said, a template for other countries, depending on their own concept, on context, their own use, etc. But I really like the fact that fundamental rights and human-centric approach as a start point.
yeah, of course. Thank you so much. So another question from Anna. There are standards for quality, sorry, that organization get certified for an international level. Can something similar can be done for AI?
There are definitely works around that. So just like ISO standards for different applications, or IEEE engineering or technical standards. There is work around best practices and certification for AI and autonomous systems. I think the regulation, the proposed EU regulation, requires an EC labeling. So just like a label affixed to the products or the services. What it means that you have done the conformity assessment, you have submitted all your stuff, your AI is now registered in the EU database, and you're good to go. I think that will be like the standard point, starting point rather, for that labeling scheme, given that what is being proposed right now is a self-assessment, so it's not an independent third party coming in. If I can do Richard already mentioned one of the groups that I'm involved with, ForHumanity. So we're looking at building an independent audit and certification scheme for AI systems. We are now around 300 something people from around the world, 27 countries represented. And what we're trying to do is building an audit framework that would be applicable for any size and type of organization across any industry, that asks that allows an independent auditor, certified independent auditor, to come in, go through this audit framework, and provide a seal, like a certification seal to these companies, or their systems rather, not the companies.
Amazing. This is a very ambitious and important program.
Certainly ambitious. You're feeling that ambition.
So I will go ahead with a bunch of questions that I collect from community. So mostly of AI systems depends on other tool and data. Do we have enough provisions being created in a regulatory framework to minimize or mitigate from risk associated while using third-party tools?
I'm assuming you're talking about the proposed regulation here.
Yeah.
Okay. For sure, I think one thing to remember is that you're still subject, if you're a provider of these systems, if you're a developer of these systems used in EU, you're still subject to requirements of GDP with regards to your data, establishing the legal basis for collecting and processing that data, and all the requirements that come with GDPR. So you already have this fundamental that you need to abide by. What the proposed regulation brings is an extra element of, so it requires the developers in the sense that the provider companies, it requires the developers to create a risk management system and a quality assurance system. So within those, you have to not only look at your models, models and implications and consequences, risks, harms, burdens, whatever it is, you also have to look at the quality of the data and data inflows and how this like third-party data is coming and how it was collected. Was it with consent? Was it by like legal? Did it have a legal basis? It's stuff that is coming from GDPR as well. But also it brings this next level of quality of data, representativeness of data, the recency of data, etc. So those two new systems of risk management and quality assurance will definitely be great added elements how do you say, to this new systems going forward.
Thank you so much. So other question, it is clear stated that Commission may expand the list of high-risk AI systems. It is not really clear how this will be possible, since not high-risk AI systems are not submitted to the regulation. So will a special body be created for those who feel harmed by the use of AI systems that are not considered high risk today?
I would say a few points. One is it is true, as far as I can tell from the regulation, that it doesn't clearly point out to methods or mechanisms for individual recourse and redress if you're being harmed or impacted by the systems. So my expectation is that these will either go through like national judicial systems and or complaints to the appointed national oversight bodies, whether that's the DPAs, like data protection agencies, or a separate body that national governments might appoint for this regulation on specifically. However, there is some some detail around how the list might be expanded within the body of the text. So we know that this is a proposed regulation, right? And it is not going to become regulation until it's approved by all the states in its final form, etc. So I expect some changes to that high risk list over the course of these debates and before the final stuff is approved. Also the after it becomes regulation, after it becomes an approved legislation, it's enforced, etc., the Commission has the power to amend the list. So I think it was, I'm gonna say the first review is within 3 years of it going into force, and then there are like regular, I can't remember the frequency of the regular reviews, but the text gives power to the Commission to regularly convene and go with that risk list, high risk list, and expand accordingly as what they see, new stuff coming out, what they, it's new technologies, emerging technologies that were not, out, or some of the harms weren't so apparent. So they'll do this regular review of that list. The Commission also has the power to amend what's the word? The details and the techniques and approaches that or the provisions as per the documentation that the regulation is bringing forward. So my feeling is, the stuff is going to go through national judicial systems. You're going to have court cases. Those court cases will establish some decisions. In the meantime, the Commission itself, on a higher level, is going to do this like regular reviews and update that risk accordingly.
Thank you so much for the clarification. So we have a question from Jaisal. Do countries also look at regulation and policies for protecting vulnerable groups?
Yes and no. I think yes is there is definitely a call for vulnerable populations, whether that is due to age or being part of like marginalized communities or having different levels of ability that you're either not able or like I said, age, you're not able to understand the full implications of systems. So there is a carve-out for the protection of those groups rather. There's also obviously always the conventions on protection of children's rights, protection of people with disabilities. So this law is not a comment over it. It is complementary to all those regulations. However, in practice, I think they're going to wait and see how the countries establish the actual practices and how much they're going to enforce it in practice. So I think that's a wait and see thing.
Thank you so much.
So if I may, like for example, recruitment is listed as a high risk, and it's one of my continuous fights, right? Bias in recruitment systems and use of pseudoscience in recruitment systems. But recruitment itself is listed as a high risk. In other parts of the text, you're looking at, okay, we're providing, we need protections for people with disabilities. What are you going to do about those recruitment systems or vendors that filter out people with disabilities because their speech was not recognized, their behavior was analyzed in a way, or their responses were analyzed in a way that filtered them out. What's going to be the recourse? So like I said, we'll see how that's going to look in practice.
Thank you so much. So we have another question. In reference to identifying people from anonymous data by combining different data sets, who is responsible for privacy, ethics, and so on in this case, and how it can be incorporated inside the regulations?
I think go back to the first question that you asked, just remembering that you're still subject to GDPR. The regulation itself and GDPR, as well as all this like risk management and quality assurance systems, the regulation itself is still not too or proposed regulation, I should say, is still not too strict or too onerous as it stands. So it provides guidance for data AI systems, etc. But where it really went down without too much explanation is the data sets. It is calling out on training, validation, and test data sets and the qualities that those data sets should have. So whether it's something that the data that you collected directly, whether it's from that you're buying or purchasing or purging from internet or scraping from internet, however you collected it, you still need to ensure that the data, or like putting together different data sets from third parties, you still need to ensure that it is representative. It is, it representative of the intended population that it's going to be used on, that is recent, is complete, that is free of errors, although they don't necessarily define what error means. But it provides, what it does provide is, okay, these are the things that you need to look. I think that's because there's not one single right answer to this, and they don't want to be too descriptive in the regulation. But what it does, it makes it is, all these companies are going to look at these technical requirements and do their conformity assessments, they'll submit it. Over time, that database of submitted conformity assessments is going to bring out, okay, this is what company A did, how they approach this versus company B, and can we look at the best practices or better practices? And I feel like one of the ultimate use cases of that database is almost like collecting the practices and coming up with figuring out what's good, what's bad, what could have been better.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I am very interested in this point because I think that definitions are very important. So definition of errors or boundaries between what is a subliminal manipulation or just nudging. For example, yeah, this was another question that I collected, and it refers to this. I will read it. So other manipulative or exploitative practices affecting adults that may be facilitated by AI systems could be covered by already existing data protections. So what does it mean? It means that, for example, social network behavior manipulation will be still legal, right?
Possibly. Because what it says is the system should have like manipulate or exploit with the intention to materially distort behavior. So I'm not a lawyer, please don't hold me like to this like some of the legal definitions, but as I'm reading it, it says materially distort behavior of a person and in a manner that causes harm to other person or others. You are not going to put in your conformity assessment, or you're not intentionally, ideally, knowingly, put this down as, okay, I have the intention to materially distort behavior and I caused harm, and there is no explanation of how that harm should be evidenced. So how do you even like show that you've been harmed, or there was that the cause of that harm was the AI system used? So that leads me to think that although this particular like subliminal manipulation or manipulation piece sits under prohibited systems, that it doesn't really prohibit much in practice. It still leaves way to manipulation via nudging, as you mentioned. So if I'm in a supermarket and the supermarket knows my profile, my shopping profile, and they're pushing product updates or sales that happen to be happening that day through, through the system, is that subliminal? Is that obvious? Is it causing me harm? It's open to questions. Or if you're talking about Facebook or YouTube pushing certain, feeds to you, or suggesting the next item, or suggesting groups, or etc., is that with the intention to do harm? Is it subliminal? So there's because it's so open, I don't see that as personally, I don't see it as a very effective prohibition or proposed restriction.
Yeah.
So I think your question around like nudging, micro targeting, personalized feeds probably fall under this, or choice architecture, etc. In general, I think all of this would have fit under this one way or another, but it doesn't, because that the way that the sentence is written.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you so much. And I will give back the control to Richard.
And I'll pass it straight over to Jaisal to say some thanks.
Thanks, Merv, so much. I think this has been so interactive and took us into the depth of regulations. We all understand the risks and the assessment and the policies and governance around mass surveillance, personality identification, personality hack, content personalization. Building the regulations and the guardrails around it is so important. But what is more important is, understanding the definitions of each of these and how the companies can actually conform to this and register themselves. Basically, what you mentioned about the audit framework is really what people need to look at a given point of time when people are going to build more and more innovation using AI, VR, AR, and other technologies which are actually doing all this data collection and assessing and using observed data, observation data, or computed data, etc., building inferences from all of them. I think in that case, having regulation and conformance is important, but building definitions is the key to it. I think this is what I understand from what you have said. Yeah, thank you once again.